Well, hi, I'm Dan Snow, and I was born in 1950 in Kansas City, Missouri. I grew up in the Lee Summit, Missouri area, and I went to high school in Lee Summit. Then later on, I went to the Kansas City Art Institute, and I've been, started out as an artist. I knew a long time ago when I was at a young age that's what I wanted to do, and I'm pretty much stuck with that the whole time. I'm pretty much a free spirit, and my art is spontaneous, and I love to do it. I don't do work for decoration. I don't really do it for commercial purposes. I do it because I feel like I have to do it. Things that kind of get me upset has to come out in the art. When I was, the first drawing I can ever remember doing was of my teacher in first grade, and I think I made her look kind of hideous. It was probably because I was just not very good at drawing, but I spent a lot of time drawing and doodling in class. Probably should have paid more attention to the teacher and what they were teaching, but I was always doing that, and I've kept that up. Space and time, and I want to leave something behind. And these drawings are a record of somebody at this particular time and what they were thinking and doing. And look at the whole, the history of the human race. What is left behind is art, is very important. I mean, from cave paintings, cave painters weren't getting paid or going to be in galleries. They were doing it because they had to do it. Van Gogh only sold one painting in his whole life, and he couldn't, he couldn't possibly imagine that his paintings would be worth millions of dollars. My art, that's what it is grown into being. Starting probably 1967, 68, I started doing drawings that were a little scary, I suppose. I mean, one theme that I've always worked with is I call the self-contained man. It's like eventually human beings will be inside of a little sphere. They won't have any lower extremities. They'll only have, the upper torso and arms. They'll never leave their little sphere. And as years have gone by, human beings have been more self-contained. We'd ride around in cars. We're computers. We're in a world now that you almost don't have to leave your place. Pretty soon the food will just be pumped into you, and that's what we'll have. It's pretty a little scary, I suppose. It gets to the point where it's almost organics versus mechanics, and I think the mechanics are kind of taken over. And the beautiful thing about life, the organics, that's where we come from. We're not going to completely escape that. We can, maybe we might be a robot one day, and probably will. When I was growing up in Lee Summit, it was a small town. It's really pretty good size now, but it was completely different than the Art Institute. The small town effect, it's kind of like the suburban, art is the shopping mall art, and everything is pretty laid back, watercolors and just cutesy stuff. Well, I pretty much rejected that. Even way before, I was doing paintings out in my backyard. One of the first paintings I did when I was 14 was called Piercing Headache. That was, for me, that was pretty innovative. You're sort of insulated, but the Art Institute was a place that was, free thinkers. You didn't have to dress up like you were going to, kindergarten or Sunday school or something. And the Vietnam War was going on. When I was here in Lee Summit, I worked. I had a job at a hobby store and worked at a slot track, and stuff like that. And all the time I was doing this art. And some of it was maybe I was doing ship paintings or seascapes, kind of, blah, blah, blah. But then at the same time, I was doing other things like, Cracked Earth, and The Last Days on Earth, temper paintings. And so I was into Da Vinci and Rembrandt, way back in high school, because I really respected, the older artists. And so it was a shock going to the Art Institute from here, being in Lee Summit. And I learned a lot. One of the first things that when I was a freshman at the Art Institute, the instructor said, you people aren't artists, and most of you will never be artists. So, here we are. And we worked the first year, that was actually in 1968, and that was first year Earth Day. And we all had projects to do, and we had to express ourselves, what the Earth meant to us. And one of the things that I did was I dug a deep hole in the ground. I took 2 trash cans, inverted it, put one on top of the other, and down in the very bottom of the trash can, I made a plaster eyeball, and I painted it really a realistic eyeball. I put these little flashlights inside the cans, and then I set this all down in the ground, covered it up so it was perfectly level, and had a little eyepiece. And so you had to get down on your hands and knees, and you look in this little eyepiece, and what do you see? You see this big eye looking back at you, like, it's the Earth, and it's watching us, Another thing at the Art Institute, one guy, Dave Van he did a thing where he put up a whole bunch of the tables with tablecloth and cake and ice cream and pop and all this stuff, big, long, 3 or 4 tables long. And the day before the project, and so when all the class came out and we sat around this table and we looked at this food, and he said, okay, now the Earth God's really pissed off at you folks. You've really been screwing up. You've been messing up really bad. And the Earth God says, you got to eat this food. And so we all looked at it and said, we're not eating this. So all of a sudden, this guy from the conservatory at UMKC come running down the hill wearing a suit coat and a jock strap. And that was it. He had 2 quarts of Foremost milk. He was slinging it in the air. He jumped on top of the tables. He ran all the way down the tables. He kicked all the food into our faces. And, the teacher at the end, he fell over backwards because he was coming at him. And he was throwing, the guy was throwing records, 45 RPM records, like, Earth Angel and the songs that, had something to do with the Earth. And so, and another one was this girl. She got in the mud pit with a cashmere sweater and rolled all around. And another one, which I have a photograph of somewhere, of a bunch of crucified a bunch of little dolls on this big mountain of stuff, and I'm right up on the top, helping drive the nails in. These dolls hanging from the cross. And walked across. Warwick Boulevard, and then there was stuff that was, going on that was wild. I mean, maybe it's still going on wild, but I don't remember that. So it was a real shock. One of the more interesting things that I did when I was at the Art Institute in 1971, my friend Bob Stevenson and I, we got some plans from a 1904 Popular Mechanics magazine. And the illustration on these plans was, this guy was he was flying a hang glider, over a valley, and there was a train below him and everything. It's like, wow, this is great. So we built this glider. It had a 28-foot wingspan. It was wood, and we used plastic instead of canvas. Piano wire for all the rigging and everything, and we put it together. And we first flew it at Volker Park, and it attracted a lot of attention. A bunch of people came down. It didn't fly really good, of course. It wasn't something that you really did. You wouldn't want to jump off a cliff with it. But we took it apart, and we walked over to Loose Park in Kansas City, and we got a whole entourage of people following us. We had a police escort. There was kids and dogs, and we walked down, took it over there. We put it together, and we flew it, and got up. I was the lightest of the two, so Bob was too heavy. He couldn't get in it and fly. And you did it by shifting your body weight. It didn't have any kind of controls. And so you could, that's the way you were supposed to fly it. And I got 15 or 20 feet off the ground. And but if we'd have jumped off a cliff, we would have died. But it ended up on the front page of the Kansas City Star, and also on the evening news, KMBC evening news with Larry Moore came out and interviewed us, and it was an interesting experience. It was really fun. Another thing that I experienced was I started doing lithographs in about 1967. It was down underneath the old painting building at school, and it was like in a dungeon. But the whole process of lithography is really an old process, working on litho stones that was quarried from the Bavarian Alps. And I had been doing Bic pen drawings, which I was using really very fine tone, a lot of intricate textures, and I needed a way somehow reproducing my drawings. And lithography just worked out perfect for me because you can do a limited edition, multiple prints, and the velvet feeling of drawing on a litho stone is so beautiful. You have to go through the etching process of desensitizing the stone. Nitric acid and gum arabic, and do the whole thing. And I really got into doing that. And so the last litho that I did was about 1992, because I haven't been back to school, at the Art Institute for a long time. I have my own litho stones. They came from Admiral Boulevard in Kansas City. They were actually buried in a wall. The stones were placed in this wall like bricks with mortar between them. And I put out the word that I was looking for litho stones, and the Cunningham twins, who was an old couple of old brothers in this print shop, and they called me up and said, come out and look at these stones. We've been taking them out of this wall. So they were laying out. So I picked out 11 stones. They all had old advertising, old engravings on them, and they told me that these stones came over to the United States during the Civil War. They had probably made 2 or 3 trips back and forth from the U.S. to Europe as ballast in sailing ships when they didn't have any cargo, so they had these litho stones. The litho stones are from the Bavarian Alps. They are the same fine textured limestone that the fossil Archaeopteryx is found in the Bavarian stone, which is the sort of the half bird, half dinosaur fossil. And so anyhow, these stones have amazing amount of geologic history, plus the fact that after you do a litho, the stone, after you etch it, you print it, you have prints that are going to last, are going to outlast me. And so that's really the beauty of it, and it's an old process. So I did the litho stones, plus at the same time drawing and painting, charcoal, all different kind of medium. I like to work in whatever is important. Bill McKim was my instructor at the Art Institute, and he said that after all the technology, after everything's gone, you can always pick up a piece of charcoal and make a drawing. So, that's, and that's where I come up with my philosophy is drawing is the result of letting your arm fly loose. If you don't let your arm fly loose, you're never going to make anything. You're never going to make a drawing. You're never going to create anything. So people say, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't draw a straight line, blah, 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 blah. All they got to do is actually let their arm fly loose, and they might be surprised at what they can do. My influences, when I was in high school, of course I liked the classical painters, artists, Rembrandt and Da Vinci. But later on, when I was exposed to the Surrealist group, those guys really made an effect on me, because they were, it wasn't anything conventional. It was people like Max Ernst, Salvador Dali, Rene Magritte. They would all create this picture that was surreal. It was not reality exactly, but it was so real that it, it seemed like that it was talking to you. And Max Ernst was a German painter. He was a prisoner of war during World War One. He eventually moved to the United States. Some of the things that he did was amazing. Dali was quite amazing. He some of his early paintings, lugubrious games, and he got kicked out of the Surrealist group because he did a painting that had one of the figures had shit on his pants. And this was supposed to be a real, this group was supposed to be real high cutting edge. Well, it was, but they still had the limitations, so they kicked him out of the group basically because he was making too much money, and this guy had defecated on his pants. I mean, all my art is trying to express, the inner turmoil, or you read something in the paper, or something that's going on, and that's where the artist, I think, is important to express that feeling and let it come out. I've been doing that all along and continue to do that. Like one of the last things, one of the paintings I did was, I call it fecal accident at the pool. There's the article, you see it on the news, where somebody, little kid, messes in the pool, and then everybody's trying to get out of there as quick as possible. Well, to me, that's subject matter. That's subject matter. Another piece of subject matter is, for instance, my wife told me about, she was driving the car and she heard a thud. She looked in the rear view mirror and she saw the squirrel writhing in pain in the road, and its little nut had popped out of its mouth and was bouncing across the road. And it's like, thinking about this when you're driving, the empathy. This poor little animal was just trying to store its nuts up for the winter. Okay, well that was a pretty intense little image right there. So I take that image. I've got a painting that I'm working on right now. That these two people are in a car. She's looking in the rearview mirror. She sees this squirrel dying and the nuts bouncing off in the rearview mirror. But in the windshield of the car is a 24 car pileup just right ahead of her. And all these people are crashed and burned, and it's this horrible wreck. But she's looking in the rearview mirror at this little squirrel. And it's like some kind of a dual universe. You're concentrating on this, but at the same time, it's your own fate that you're in control of. You're going down the road, and she's going to be in that wreck any minute. And I call it no time for ennui, because there's no time to think about the poor little squirrel and feel the feelings and all, because you're going to die. You're going to die soon, and so it's little things like that is what I like to do. And some of the early stuff, rat dying in sheer happiness, balloon salesman, the little guy inside of a bomb that's got jail cell window on the outside, and the whole bomb is held up by balloons. And how many balloons does it take to hold a big bomb up? When one of those balloons pop, it's over. One drawing, a big pen drawing, Infinite Fabrication, where 1973, there wasn't genetic engineering really going on back then, but my whole idea was that one day we could take genes and we could splice them together, and we could have parts of animals, our bodies could have parts of animals. And that drawing, is sort of one of my favorite, an old one. I believe that very simple tools can create some of the most complicated things you can imagine. It doesn't take a lot of complicated, expensive tools to make art. Something so simple as a pencil, as a pen. It's basically, it's your hand, your eye, and your brain, and those three things. You start out on a blank space, and your brain tells you where your hand makes the marks, and as these things build up, they start relating, or the image actually starts saying, well, this looks like this. These marks they look like this. And you keep, these things kind of grow. It's almost like it's an organic growth. It's like a tree will grow to the light. And, it doesn't have any particular plan except for it's just that spontaneous growth. That's the way a drawing is. So any tool you can draw is good with. I mean, to make art. Painting is different in the respect that instead of lines and texture, it's more of a values and color and blending. And I always like to do stuff. It has kind of a soft. I like to create a kind of a three-dimensional space, a visual space within the space that you can almost imagine that you can go around maybe behind the subject. You can go around it, and when I'm working, I'll throw my eyes out of focus, because the softness of things. You see the darkness, you see the light and dark. Of course, that's pretty much everything that we see is reflected light. I mean, the sun, the stars, that's not reflected. They actually are emitting, but everything else is reflected light. And those black and white, the chiaroscuro of the patterns is what it creates the depth, and the tonalities create depth. I like to do that in the work, and I like to work outside too. I'll set up an easel, and I'll find a subject that I like. I've worked, did a big pastel drawing down at 30th and Main here in Kansas City. Just the interesting buildings and the people walking by, and I just sort of let my arm fly loose. Things happen. Cars are coming out of the pavement. People are starting to take on animal forms. They're walking along. And the sky is always fantastic because it's always changing. People see things in clouds and skies. I do too. And so that's an interesting thing that you can actually set up and work on site. And then the other thing is I like to work at where it's almost dark, where in a really subdued light, and things seem to kind of come out of the darkness. And it's like when I'm working on a painting sometimes, in a really subdued light, things sort of emerge out of the darkness. And when you turn the light on, then later on, it's like, wow, it's like this stark thing that's right there that you may not even know what it is that you're making. I'll go outside and I'll just do black and white with just charcoal, and just let my arm fly loose and smudge it around and move the stuff around. And then later on the next day, you'll look at it and go like, wow, what was I doing? But I like it. I can't explain it. You can't explain art. If you could explain it in words, you wouldn't make it in the first place. And that's sort of my philosophy. So really, as far as the medium, anything goes. I mean, you can all the way from computers to taking a bunch of junk and metal and putting it together and bolting it or whatever. And I'll take cut small saplings and vines, and I'll weave these constructions, these structures out in the woods. I like to do that. I'll pick up junk and I'll put stuff together. I got into making videos. I called they're objects in a state of flux, which I collect little objects, almost like little artifacts. We all have this little junky, weird stuff that's around that collects. I'll take all these things, and I don't like to give away my the actual how I do this, but I say I take these objects and I put them in a state of electromagnetic flux. and all these objects, little things that have never been related or come together before, are in this little flux, and they're all moving around, they're juxtaposed, they're moving around and interacting, nudging each other, and there's these totally unexpected things happening with it. And if I put it to music, and these things are just, it's just continuous, and it's kind of like the way the universe maybe has been created. I had another one. I took a sausage, a link sausage, and I put it in a piggy cook, which is this little toy that I had when I was a kid. That you would shake and it would flip it. This little pig would rock back and forth, and it would flip an egg and a bacon, over in this little skillet. So anyhow, I put a sausage in it, a real live sausage, and I hung it on the wall. And for years and years and years, it hung around. And the thing was still dripping grease after like 15 years. I'm mainly painting. I sort of kind of gave up, as drawing and lithography as much as doing paintings, because sometimes I think that, painting just kind of really jumps out, and people like, larger things. People don't want to always take a lot of time and look at the fine details. So, but I believe that that's important. But I have been doing more paintings lately. I'm working on one which I call the pre-invalid wheelchair victim, which is also, it's the future of healthcare, where it's sort of this dismembered corpuscular kind of a creature with all this, missiles and housing developments encroaching, and just like, the only thing the thing is walking around is like it's got a digestive system, and that's about it, and some bones and stuff. I've always been influenced by music. I love music, listen to it, pretty much all the time. My art it's like the work, the music is incorporated into the work. One of my favorite musicians of all time is Frank Zappa, Mothers of Invention. The first time I ever heard Zappa was Weasels Rip My Flesh, and that was about 1968 at the Art Institute, or 69, something like that. And listening to up in the dormitory room at Bob Stevenson, and I'll tell you, the music, it was so radical. Of course, Zappa was like, he was banned from radio for a long time because stuff was so controversial. I've collected over 60 of his albums. I've listened to him. I've gone along with the stuff. He was a genius. He was before he died. He was actually was before a Senate hearing with John Denver, trying to talk about why albums shouldn't be rated or labeled, like the government was wanting to label music, and you can't do that. There's some of the stuff, say for instance, like Zappa was doing, actually. If you're living in a free country, if you can create and you can do the stuff that he did, the stuff, now I don't know, maybe I don't get out or hear as much stuff, but it was like the stuff was so far out there and intense. This is Dan. This is Connie.
I'm Connie.
And my wife, Connie, and
yes.
I'm her husband, Dan. And here we are.
And he's my artist. So.
Well, I try. One of the first paintings I ever did for her was The Green Man, was the little guy with this, going like, my God, it's kind of a green. And I give that to her. That was before we were married. I mean, I don't know how many, girlfriends get a painting of a green man that's actually having some kind of psychological problems. But she still has that painting. So
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So she knew what she was getting into. Go ahead, Connie. What do you think? You probably don't believe a word I say.
And no, I've always found all your work fascinating. He was always drawing all the time ever since I've known him, and so it's interesting, just the progression from point A to point B. It flows through different mediums back and forth, but kind of picked up his own style, and that's what I really like. The intensity, the commentary, and just the subtleties, especially if you look at the lithographs, something like that. There's a lot of subtle shades of grays and blacks, and then the space. The space is really great because it's, is it the foreground, the background? Are you going off into another dimension? I think I always enjoyed that. I thought it was very interesting, and just like I said, the progression from one thing to another. He is always interesting, never boring, and the subject matter is always good.
Oh, the subject matter is
intense.
Yeah.
He kind of draws from whatever's happening at the time. Unfortunately, a lot of times things do repeat themselves. Make social commentary, and then here it comes around again. So sometimes people just never learn.
Yeah. No, I don't think people are ever going to completely learn and know what to do with their lives. It seems confusion and going down the wrong path is going to be a standard thing for forever. And but as an artist, it's nice to point out some of those things and try to make a little, whether you can make some humor out of it or social commentary or satire. It's important. But that's what I like to do.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But I think it's kind of good, kind of for us together. I've always kind of felt it's been good to, try to inspire Dan if I can, and encourage him, and see what happens. It seems to have worked out.
Yeah. Well, it's never, she's never like, oh, why are you doing this? Or, I don't like that. I mean, sometimes she'll say, well, there may be a drawing or something that I don't like, and I'll say, I don't really like this. And she'll say, well, I really like it. And then later on, that's the one I'll sell, or something that, somebody else. And maybe you make a mistake. You can't ever say, oh, this is a mistake, or this is wrong, because if you go back and you keep working on it or something, you make it into something. And, so sometimes, you learn from your mistakes and build on that. And art is like that. It's art and music too. It's something where you're groping, and if you knew exactly what you were doing, you wouldn't do it.
There's a lot of good humor in his work too. That's another thing too. I think differentiates him from a lot of folks. Is you can laugh at yourself, laugh at what's going on. Just people in general. People are nuts.
Yeah. I mean, I did this drawing. You saw the one that's a sauna belt family where they're all wearing sauna belts because they're so proud of they're losing weight and all this, and they're having their portrait taken, and their
doing the right
the
thing.
backdrop is this polluted city with the smokestacks and stuff, but they're into sauna belts. That's as far as. And this one drawing, Aunt Biddy's sauna belt. The sauna belt is actually made up of hot dogs. And so it's a whole series of hot dogs, and she's got her smokestacks in her head, and a couple of ex-husbands on each shoulder, and there's a Lincoln. She's sitting on top of a Lincoln Continental with a bunch of tire pumps, trying to blow up this sauna belt because that's how you inflate them. And
At least in that drawing.
yeah, in that drawing. So. Yeah, I mean, I want to try to make people laugh at the stuff, but I also want to try to scare people too. I mean, I want them to go, like, gee, And so it's sort of, you can do both at the same time.
Well, and if they can think about things and then kind of experience the work, go from one point to another, kind of work through. There's so much activity.
Yeah.
It's really amazing how many things he puts into a lot of drawings. Hardening of the arteries. Who would have thought? You look at, you're following one thing to another. So I think it's just amazing.
Well, hardening of the arteries, like in one part of the artery, there's like a little beaver that's on tripod legs and feet, and then he's got part bomb, and he's just like really eager, and he's wanting to explode something really bad, and then there's a part of it where there's a frog as its brain is being probed by some kind of a machine, and all, crystals growing in the gut or whatever, and in the arteries and in people's faces, and it all grows out of that. If people don't wake up, they're going to find that they're basically going to be going through the meat grinder and have to pay the price. I mean, Hieronymus Bosch, the paintings that he did, I think probably maybe it was the 1500s, I can't remember exactly, but that was before photography. And the depiction of hell and stuff scare people to death. And, I think that's important. People need to be, they need to be shocked. So art to me is important. It's not like, decoration, or does this piece of art match my couch? Give me a break. As far as the future plans that I have being an artist, I think I'm going to continue on the same way. Only working when I have the urge and when I feel like it, when I have something to say, that's what I'm going to do. If I'm going to explore, if I get into some new medium, if that's what I'm going to do. I don't really have any specific plan. I really would like for people to take a look at what I do and think about it. Think about what they're seeing. That's important to me. That's what I want to leave behind is the art. I mean, I don't know where we're going to be at in 100 years, but I know a lot of this work is still going to be around. And people will say, well, what was that guy doing and thinking way back in in 2013 or in 1968? What was going on? 68, Vietnam War, Civil Rights Movement. I mean, it was a tumultuous time, and it still is, even though it seems a little more, everybody's more callous than the trauma and the terror is kind of desensitized people, as much more than it used to be. So we don't want to lose track of that.